Yeah, all right.
I saw you loading up for that. It was so
You
impressive.
took a very deep breath.
Yeah.
I had to pick a number on a scale of 1 to 10 of how excited I wanted to sound.
What number was that?
That was like a 7.5.
We know
Nailed it.
why you play guitar and you don't lead vocals now.
No, that was a cheer, not a sing.
Oh, right. Sorry.
By the way, most people in the room this past Sunday don't know this, but Chase played a critical role to keep me from walking out on stage too early.
I wasn't sure if I was helping you or not.
Oh, very helpful.
Oh, okay, good.
Grote ran over and told me something about how there was like a down bridge, or he used a bunch of musical terms.
Yeah.
And I
And
was
Chase
like,
will just do the nod.
yeah. He looked over like,
Much
you
more
faked the
helpful.
look at the laptop, but you were actually looking at me like,
If
All
you don't
right.
get up here right now.
yeah, all right, Ben,
Yes.
it's time.
Well, luckily, it's like on the crash out of the song. So I'm just celebrating, looking around. you
Yeah.
know.
Nodding your head.
Hey, we did it.
Everything's
Yeah,
good.
yeah.
And also letting Ben know it's time
Yeah.
to come out.
Yeah, speaking of nods, discipleship.
Man, so glad we planned that out.
Wow. We really know how to write up a script for a podcast nowadays.
Yes.
We are, I don't know.
Launching?
I
Starting,
guess-
beginning.
We're turning
All
over a
of the
new
above.
leaf.
Okay.
Like
we're
a
doing-
growth leaf.
Yes.
Oh.
Yeah. Not that we were inherently bad
No.
previously.
No.
We're just doing
We
a
always wanna
new
get better.
thing.
Yeah.
Wow, a new thing.
Yeah. All
right.
the DC talk running through my head right now.
I'll miss Toby Mac. Rest in peace.
What?
He's alive. Not culturally, though.
Oh my gosh.
Sorry.
He
Good
still
play.
posts on social media.
Should I
He's
stop
out there.
recording
It's
or
fine.
no?
Okay. This is very us.
All right, great. So if you haven't heard the news, actually, I don't know when they could be listening to this 2 years from now, and they're just reminiscing.
Catching
Welcome
up.
back. Hopefully, it's going well for you. If you're new, though, we're starting a new thing, and we're calling that thing the discipleship process.
Ooh.
Yeah,
Catchy name.
clever. Now you may be asking, Chase, what is a discipleship process? And we would say,
Many things for the next couple of
Oh,
minutes.
yeah, great.
Yep.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's why we're all here.
Here's an episode for you.
Yeah.
Although not really an episode, because this is going to be, hopefully an answer for you at least. This is going to be like a backstory of why we're doing it right. And
Yes.
to kind of go hand in hand with our website and our insert other things here.
All the efforts.
I'm scattered. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
All right. So we wanted to kind of hop on and give you the reasonings
Hop on.
why.
I like what you did there. Being an influencer.
Yes, hop online.
Yes.
We wanted to jump on and kind of give some reasoning behind why now of all times we are deciding to really double down on having a true, tried and true discipleship process with like actual steps and classes and here's where you go next and all the things. So I would think maybe the first thing we can answer is what made us what things caused us to say, all right, now's the time that we need to like really make this thing happen.
Yes. Who's going to take that? All of us, I guess.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
he was looking at you. I feel
Yeah.
like
I don't know.
first.
I feel like it was like, hey,
He's like,
throw me-
hey.
You just tend to kind of talk after I talk because you're waiting.
I feel like it's in
When
the.
do I-
It's like in the.
We're just going to like go in a little circle the entire time.
Yeah. Maybe I shouldn't go first, though.
And you don't have to if you don't want to.
Okay.
Did you say shouldn't or should?
Shouldn't. All right. Yeah. I'll jump in.
Okay.
So for me, it was a lot of personal reflection, not to go into a long Ben story, but January 17th of this year, I felt God directly communicating to me that we needed to change kind of the base of how we're pursuing following Jesus here at Vertical, which is an incredibly disruptive statement because the base has been the same for 13, 14 years, a long time. But when God starts moving, you respond. At least that's kind of the posture we take. But we do that very carefully. So that's kind of the origination point. But what I began to see on further reflection and talking to the staff, it's something the entire staff was feeling, that we were feeling the burden that previously we were a church for the unchurched. But when someone begins to attend church here for an extended period of time, they're no longer unchurched. And we weren't helping them grow as disciples of Christ. And obviously that is the instruction that Jesus gives,
Right.
that we should become disciples and that we should help other people become disciples. And we realized there was a huge gap in our current methodology that did not allow people to take that journey. To be even more vulnerable, if people wanted to take that journey, they had to leave our church and join another church to get those sorts of offerings. So this didn't originate with me, though. The leaders that were here before me were desperate to try to get this in place, and it didn't happen for a lot of different reasons that weren't anybody's fault in particular. So I think what God was doing in my heart in January post-pandemic was, at least on some scales post-pandemic, was helping me go back to something that God has really desired to do inside of Vertical for many, many years. We've just been distracted and unable to do it up until this point.
Yeah, I think I feel like the identity of our church has been changing over the past year or two. And this just feels like one of those things that, although we've wanted it for a long time, there's been a lot of like, this is probably the most steady our staff has been in terms of people since the place started, and well, that's not necessarily true because there were people that were here for a long time after it, quote unquote LifeBridge launched, but they were still kind of dealing with the challenges of still being a new church, still kind of coming out of that church plant kind of mindset. And like, honestly, we're fully past that. So I don't know. It's felt like a logical next step the more we've kind of wrestled with it. I don't know if you guys have felt the same way.
Yeah, I think for me, it was, hearing Ben's vision of it for sure. And then sitting around the staff table and hearing like just different, I guess we can call them needs or different things in the community. And we have such a small staff, even though it doesn't look like it because our volunteers are amazing and everybody thinks
like staff.
Yes, everybody thinks that they're paid
Chris
volunteers. But at the same time, those volunteers we want to protect from getting burnout, and we want to protect ourselves from getting burnout. And we want to protect anybody that's new coming in to not feel those same things. So those were the conversations that started like making me wrestle with, well, what kind of programs do we have? We do have small groups. I'm a big, promoter of small groups. And while,
literally.
Yes, literally. But also while that, creates such life change, like I love hanging out with my Monday night small group that I have with a bunch of girls that go here and even outside of Vertical, women that get to come and attend. But it's like, we all want something more. And it's just like, if I'm feeling this and I'm sitting at the staff table and sitting with leadership of, what's next? What books do we study? What questions do we, go for? What is the next step? If I'm feeling that, then surely everybody else that's walking in is also feeling this. And so at the same time, Ben's wrestling with that. I'm wrestling with this. And then I know, Megan, you had a lot of the same.
Yeah, very similar feelings. Just seeing people get frustrated. They wanted more and couldn't find more here. Or there was very simple things here. And then when they were kind of through those courses and they wanted to grow more, there would just be frustration. And then we really saw it. I know you and I did a lot, Reshma, during the pandemic when we were quarantined at home and people were saying like, okay, give us some more, give us something. We don't have enough. We don't know how to do this. Lead us. And so we were trying to run the table, our women's ministry, from home and figure out how can we help them feed themselves spiritually. And we went to kind of what we knew by default because around our staff table, we do a lot of books on growth, on spiritual health and emotional health. And that's kind of where we took that. And the women in the table ate that up. They wanted that growth. They wanted that knowledge. And so coming back from that and looking at church in a different way entirely, when Ben started rolling out that vision and his thoughts and ideas and what God was giving him, it was very clear that that was the next step. And I've been around for a long time too and seen the frustration of previous leaders trying to make it happen. I just don't think it was the right time at that point.
Yeah, timing is a big issue. And you mentioned it also, Chase. Just the way that the church has experienced its life vertical and before that LifeBridge as a part of our history, it's difficult to do things out of order, and it just wasn't quite time. We had to change some things culturally inside of our church for the environment to be ready for this sort of thing to launch, and that includes changing how we teach on Sundays. And another thing I think it's very important to say for people who are investigating this to want to learn more, we have made very sure that this wasn't just Ben sitting at his desk at home during his devotion time and, here's something God wants us to do. We've practiced this as a staff for a lengthy period of time, and we've seen it impact our own lives. And one of the things I'm most excited about is that it's going to help our people integrate in a healthy way, biblical knowledge and emotional health and activity inside of the church for the cause of Christ. Those things are going to be happening through this process, and we've seen that that's been very good for us. And it's answered a lot of things. You remember we went through the Enneagram for 19 or 23 or weeks or so, and people are like, why are we doing this? This is like, what is this for? Well, the reason that response happened in large part was because there wasn't a basis of understanding of the fact that emotional health needs to be integrated with biblical knowledge, because when you go to the Bible, and especially when you see the activity of Jesus on planet Earth, he was all about it. He was constantly calling people to that. But our community just didn't have a base to understand. So to be fair to people who have come before us, even in the tables and meetings that we were sitting in, we had a lot of false starts for a lot of different reasons. Well, we finally figured out collectively as a staff some things we needed to remedy for this effort to even launch and be successful. And here we are. And I think that's a big reason why we're so excited about it, because it's time and we are already seeing the good that can be accomplished through this approach.
Yeah. Well, I say the way we've broken down this process is, at least the initial version of it, is that there's 3 steps that kind of get you into this onboarding into being like an active disciple within, maybe discipler, and within the vertical ecosystem. And those 3 steps are getting to know the Bible. Step 1. Step 2, getting to know yourself. All right. And step 3, getting to know your purpose. Right.
Yep.
So what I think would be handy, I know if you're on the website above us a little bit, is acted like they could see me.
You did the
I mean, you know.
Above where you're listening to this at, there's some breakdowns of that. But I think people would be curious as to know, it's not hard to grasp that like we would label the Bible as important within the discipleship process, right?
That's funny. A church in the Bible?
Right. I know, it's crazy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Doesn't always happen that way. I think what's interesting though is that because we were such a church for the unchurched at times, that sometimes we would put getting to know yourself ahead of the Bible, which I don't. That's not always incorrect. I think there's portions of times where that can be beneficial when it comes to trauma and stuff like that. But we specifically, especially after reading through some Pete Scazzero stuff, going through these things in that order ourselves. Why do you think we decided that this is the order that we needed to do things? Bible, yourself, and then getting to know your purpose.
Yeah, great question.
Or maybe let's start with step 1. Why is this the place you want to start at?
Why is step 1 the most critical? I think what'll play out interestingly over the next few minutes is each of us will have kind of a different answer for that. But overall, for all of us, the Bible is a story that God has written over his creation. And it's what he's given us as a template to understand the chaotic nature of the world and the role that he plays in it. And I think it's very important, and people who have been studying the Bible and God for a very long time would echo this as well. Until we understand the larger story that God's writing, it's very difficult for us to understand our place within it, and that means our story. That's why that comes in step 2. But we have to see how God feels about his creation, how he interacts with it, the stories that he chooses to tell. So much of it is narrative. Almost half of the Bible is stories of people living out a relationship with God. And that's one of the largest questions people have when they approach church. Okay, how do I get in relationship with God? And how does he act in relationship? And what are the expectations that he has of me? So many of those questions are answered within the Bible. And it's been my heart for a long time that especially the American church is laboring under biblical illiteracy. We've reduced everything to a bottom line / church TED talk kind of, and it's been to our detriment. And we're seeing these days key players in the larger stage of Christianity in America completely walk away from their faith because that's all they ever really had. So I believe if we're going to build long-term successful disciples of Jesus under that metric, then they have to know the story. The problem is so many people are intimidated by the resource. It's ancient. It's a little bit confusing. It's been taught incorrectly in some of the churches they've been a part of. Yeah. So to have that one-on-one experience with the biblical narrative, I think is absolutely has to be the foundation that you push off of when you're trying to learn about yourself and figure out the role that you are to play in the larger story.
My answer will not sound as smart or as intelligent as that, but it's because I do know myself and I have read through the Bible. But for me, it is a little bit more personal, sitting with either group leaders or myself, like looking back, and friends in general. It's so easy to not feel equipped to lead in any aspect, and not just in a church role, but even like at your workplace, in your friend groups, like those things, because you feel like, well, I don't really know the scripture to apply to this, but everything's going to work out. Like, I know that's one, something like that. And talking to these people, they're like, well, I can't lead. I need to just sit. I just need to be there. I just need to show up on Sundays. I need to show up on Wednesdays and maybe serve. Well, all of that's great. Like, there's so much, I guess, healing that you can get from even just knowing the Bible, putting yourself in the characters' places, which is a lot of what step one is going to do, is talk about these characters in a way, not so much to say, well, this person sucked, he was a king and then he fell and then he finally met God. But like, a lot of us will resemble those characters, but we're too scared to be vulnerable enough to open and share that in step two, when we're finding out about ourselves and our childhood trauma or anything that makes us who we are and gives us our identity. But it's comforting to know that there's people in scripture that were just like us, that we previously read about, that went through these things. And until they came to the end of themselves, they weren't close to God. They were put in high positions and people thought that they were close to God. But until they actually came to the end of themselves and sat with God alone, and were strictly alone because of their own doing, their own undoing, God met them there. So understanding the Bible, how to read it, how to process it. We always hear it's the living word, like it's going to, open it up and it'll read it. I mean, I've heard that so much. I'm telling you, do not open the book and read the New Testament versus the Old Testament and just find a place. No, like, you need to go to the Gospels and find out, like, just understand what Jesus is speaking to the people, what the people are speaking to each other. It is really cool to pan out now, knowing how to read the Bible, how to study it, how to get alone and not be overwhelmed, because I'm like, okay, this book just gave me a lot of numbers. Like, what does this mean? Like, how am I supposed to trace this out? But there are so many cool aspects to that I feel like would have helped my therapy sessions, I guess, to be more vulnerable about it, to be more open to sharing with others, to share my story so that they're able to share their story. So I think it's critical to have the Bible as step one. And it kind of does go against what most models I've been a part of in the past before coming to Vertical have ever been about. You can just step in, and if you get to know yourself, then the rest will follow. Well, while you do definitely want to know yourself, I mean, I want to know who created me and why he created me this way, why he allowed me to go through the things that I went through so that I could help somebody else.
Yeah, I agree. And I'll say it in my own words too, but I think the Bible is where we have to root our foundation. And a lot of us grew up in Sunday school. A lot of us didn't. Sunday school is not really a thing, especially at Vertical. We have other things, but if you don't have that as your foundation, when it's time to get to know yourself, when it's time to process your trauma, or just maybe you don't call it trauma, the events that happen in your life and what led you to where you are, you need that foundation to go back to, and you need to be able to understand how to process the Bible and the stories that are there. And like Reshma said, going straight to those Gospels and understanding what Jesus actually said, not just the stories that we heard in Sunday school growing up, which were important, but knowing that what Jesus said, what he taught, and what the truth is there, like what God did through Jesus for us, how God feels about us. You talked a lot about that on Sunday.
Yeah.
And I was taking notes, and it was taking me back to some of those stories that I heard growing up and then processing them in a new light. So taking that step one of knowing the Bible and really learning how to read it and reread it and pull things from it and find those similarities, I think that's the best first step there could be.
Yeah, and a not so subtle point as well. I couldn't agree more, but I think those are better said than my launching off. But in a not so subtle way, when you sit with people at Vertical and see how they handle the Bible, it'll help Vertical as a whole make a lot more sense. Because we do look at these stories and talk about, yes, this person is held up as an example of a very godly man, but we're willing to investigate the failure points and what God did at that time in that person's story that is completely supernatural and unique only to God. That's going to help you understand, man, if they're pulling that out of this story in this step one of this process, and then you walk into a service in our auditorium, you're hearing very similar things, you're getting to know this community and the types of things that we focus on inside of the Bible. It just, that way you're not surprised when you step into a service and you don't get verse by verse, line by line teaching, stepping into this discipleship process, will help you know the church and also help you know how to approach the Bible to see those things as well. It can be very corrective for people, honestly, who've been hurt by the church and that sort of teaching that highlighted particular things that was basically meant to prop up traditions and hold the church together. And those aren't our main concerns.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I feel like we kind of answered steps 1 and 2 together. Because, I mean, I feel like you guys kind of explained why step 2 follows step 1 in that way, especially you, Megan, with that foundation piece. Mm-hmm. What would you say is, what are the benefits of knowing yourself in tandem with your spiritual journey? So, like, you explained why, Megan, like why the Bible has to be your foundation. Like no matter what you learn about yourself in this situation, here's your baseline. But the next step after getting to know yourself is knowing your purpose. How does getting to know yourself kind of feed into that?
I'll speak on that, I guess, for a minute. For me personally, and like Ben said earlier, all three of us have different answers that are going to hit on common ground, I know. But for me, if I didn't know myself, again, like I said previously, why God allowed me to go through the things that I went through, and having that biblical knowledge, I would not want to serve people. I would not want to live out with grace and mercy because, I could play the victim mentality of, hey, have you seen my story? Like, I don't want to serve people. Like, I don't, want to be around people. What's the point of all of this? Any of that. But the beautiful thing is the turnaround where this isn't about me. I was, put here to serve others with my story. And that brings on the suffering of Jesus. So when you read scripture, you know that he suffered and he's calling you not to the picture perfect, gospel that a lot of us try to sell quickly, but it's like, this is going to get dirty. And you're going to have to understand why things trigger you. And you're going to have to understand how to set boundaries and how to limit yourself, like we've been talking about with the staff table, and then just like different conversations. And so once you have those boundaries set, once you know your limits, once you know your trigger points, and just reasons why you react the way you do, you can pause for a minute and say, okay, I do have to give mercy here. I do have to show grace here. And so that could trickle into my service being sitting with somebody, one-on-one, having that like forgiveness talk and walking through that and then taking it a step further and, okay, I don't feel burdened with this. So I feel like I am capable of doing more and maybe leading others in this in a small group setting and being able to talk through hard things with them if it is, their past or current situations where they're also struggling with things. It's all very personal, I think, to each of us, why we're doing each step the way we are. But I know for me, like my purpose, being overseas and being with girls is completely different than your purpose, Chase, or there's different people that are called to, have their purpose lived out in their homes and raising their children in different ways. And if they don't go through like the different steps of why, understanding what their purpose is, why they, again, went through whatever that looks like, whatever their roadmap that led them here is, we could grow resentful for God not putting us in other people's places. Well, why didn't you give me those talents? Why didn't you allow me? I've always wanted to sing on stage or all these things. Why don't I have time for that? Why don't I get to do that? But I mean, I get to go overseas and I get to serve these girls and I get to sit in small groups with women here. I get to form relationships that before, understanding myself and my story, I would never want to sit in. But now, like, it's what wakes me up every morning. I don't know if you guys have.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, you have to acknowledge that you have a story. The church has done a very poor job of convincing people and showing people that they have a story that's valuable, of all of its twists and turns and the things that we're ashamed of and feel bad over. The Bible communicates clearly that God uses those as the raw material to create beautiful things for the people around us. What we have focused on inside of churches, I believe, at least in the time that I've been around them, is habit change. We're going to habit modify. So you have men that are filling up churches. They're like, okay, I'll stop looking at porn. I'll stop mistreating my wife. I'll start working harder. I'll take on the role. And then it's like a bottle rocket, like then it's done and they're back to the old habit. And then eventually those men just filter out of church or they go numb because we haven't really addressed heart change. We've talked to people, men and women, over the years about what they're doing. You need to change what you're doing. What this step 2 helps you establish is why you're doing what you're doing. That gets to the heart. So once you begin to discover your story in your heart, then you can allow God to change those things, rescue those things. A lot of them need to be rescued. And knowing yourself is the key to being able to progress, because the danger is you would get to step 3, and we're going to get to that in a moment, start to pursue your purpose. And you're actually pursuing your purpose to try to fix yourself. And that really doesn't work. Especially Reshma can attest, you take people overseas or get people in a really, really stressful situation, all that stuff starts to emerge, and it's like, whoa, this isn't fixing me. I thought it was going to fix me. I was surrounded by a lot of people in Bible school that were trying to fix themselves, and it wasn't working. So until people understand that they have a story and that story is valuable, all parts of it, for what God is seeking to do ultimately through their life, they're going to be stuck. So you have to go to step 2 before you get to step 3.
Well said.
Thank
Sequential.
you. Yep.
So I think, kind of rounding it out here, I think, trying to use the right terminology. No, I'll say it. I think a lesser church would, not calling us a greater church, but we're trying to be. I think a lesser discipleship process would try to turn it into a glorified fill volunteer positions system. And even some of that was called out in our staff meetings to trying to prevent this from happening. Shout out Chris Grote. What is step 3, maybe in longer words than getting to know your purpose? Like, what exactly are we trying to do for people in that step? Because that step doesn't have a class, spoiler alert. What does that look like? What are we trying to achieve in that step?
So the step in design is one-on-one meetings with either staff members or licensed therapists, or we keep calling them grandfathered in volunteers, and I kind of like that because it makes even
Like
young volunteers sound very old.
You've been grandfathered in.
Yes, you're good. We're going to roll over.
Once again.
But with these meetings, it's more so like uncovering why Vertical's culture is the way it is, why we do things the way we do, why we say yes to certain things and no to other things. But sitting in those one-on-one meetings are going to allow and enable you to join other circles that maybe once you weren't ever thinking you could be a part of, or things like that. Basically just getting rid of the stigma that church is just a place for people who have biblical knowledge fully. But in those steps, you're creating this confidence boost of, okay, I understand that. I remember that. I can enter these conversations with confidence, not because I've been through a seminary, but because I'm sitting in relationship with these people. And while it is different structure than a small group, this third step is going over basically evaluating like the discipleship process for yourself, what you learned, what you still want to learn, and then getting into those next steps. And this is all based off of, you've already mentioned Pete's books, but there are other steps after that. So what this is challenging you to think for yourself, to think beyond yourself, and not only in a serving position, like you said. This definitely isn't just like a call to get volunteers, but more so like, what is it that's going to fulfill you? What is it that you know that you're supposed to do that maybe you've been too nervous to do, you haven't had the confidence to do? How can we rally around you and be that team cheering you on to push you to do those greater things, to push you to take those next steps that maybe, you feel a tug for? We always talk about like dreams and, I've been told that I should do X, Y, Z, but I just don't have the qualifications. And we're just here to dismantle all those thoughts and say like, look, if us four and then the rest of the staff can sit around this table and be in relationship with people and do the things that God is allowing us to do, like everybody listening to this, watching this, whatever, 100% has the capability. And that's my goal, is that people walk out of step 3 continuously pouring into others the confidence that they've gained from being in these classes.
Yeah, I think too, like you said, it's not about just filling volunteer roles. And of course, we want to see people stepping in and serving in their areas of giftedness, if that's what they choose to do, but also people feeling comfortable enough to welcome somebody into Vertical for the first time on a Sunday and helping create that feeling of community. It's so easy to come in and feel like you're lost in this sea of people that all come here regularly, that they're part of the Vertical community and they're here and they're kind of in the crowd, but I'm just here for the first time. And so creating more of that feeling so that when people walk through the doors, it's not just one of the staff or those grandfathered in volunteers that are going up and talking to them, but everybody knows how important it is to make somebody feel welcome and help them get to that step 1, step 2, step 3, and live out their purpose.
Pretty cool.
You look so satisfied with these answers.
Yeah.
So what are the questions we haven't addressed?
I don't know. I don't know them. I've been a part of the whole thing.
Yeah, I think something that we've referenced just a couple of minutes ago, we do need to clean up. We are modeling this off some very difficult learnings from a man named Pete Scazzaro, who planted a church in New York years and years ago, and it was actually wildly successful by some metrics. But he deems, looking back, that it was very unsuccessful, partly because it was all built on his ability to perform and be what other people needed him to be. He wasn't creating a community of people who were becoming disciples, and it almost cost him his marriage. It's a beautiful story that he tells of pain and redemption. But as Pete Scazzaro lists out this process, it doesn't just have 3 steps. But for us, 3 steps made sense to get to a particular point. So Vertical Church as an organization, as a local church, will help people in this process navigate these 3 steps. And I don't want to say handhold because that sounds demeaning, but we are going to be with people who are walking through this process every step of the way, ending with a very personal interaction that's a few meetings that helps them discover purpose. And whether that benefits Vertical Church or not, maybe it just benefits the larger church.
Or a different church.
Or a different church.
and
That
that's
is a
okay.
distinct possibility, and we are very okay with that if that's God's leading. But there are steps after this that are more personal in nature. They mirror the 3 steps that we're going to go through. They're going to be listed out in our process and are listed out on the website already. But after this step 3, you are going to be charged and released to pursue these things on your own. And that's where a lot of the awesome work begins to happen. That's very intimate and personal between you and God. It's going to be a lot of interaction with the Bible. It's going to be God revealing even more about your story, and also God dialing in and refining what your purpose is. And you're going to be sitting in a community full of people doing that very same thing. So it excites us about what's going to happen to Vertical Church as we pursue this. We don't have false expectations that in 2 months it's going to change everything. That would be very contrary to what being a disciple actually is and feels like. The transformation in some ways is going to take a pretty lengthy period of time. But we do want to say as a church to kind of address some skeletons in our closet if we can here, which
Sure.
I guess we can because I'm
Why
about
not?
to.
It's our podcast.
You're the boss. Go ahead.
Yes, we have started and stopped a lot of things in our history. In an attempt to try to get around maybe this idea. No need to go into all those reasons. This is something that we're starting and we're committed to not stopping because it is the biblical model. There's no reason to change those things. People may be asking, well, are the other efforts that this church is involved with going to continue? I really love Hope 4. Are we stopping Hope 4 for this? No. We're not stopping those efforts.
If anything, they should go hand in hand.
Yeah.
In some
Yeah,
ways.
it'll enhance
yes.
it.
These will
That's right.
enhance and
Like
support.
steroids.
Yeah, and yeah, exactly. Good call.
Next punchline.
Direct parallel.
Yeah.
As we think about, okay, the world has been shut down for quite a long time, and we as believers have kind of been given a pass on thinking globally, but we're going to need to get back to that eventually. Who's going to go when that happens? When those gates open again, who's going to be on those planes, going to those places, doing those things? Well, in being engaged in this process is going to mean on those trips, we will probably have to say, look, we've got to cap it at this. I know you've discovered your purpose, and I know it's overseas in these particular things, but we're full right now. Those are the dreams that we have of people coming into our church saying, I've been addicted to drugs for 30 years. I need to talk to a staff member. And a staff member being able to think, no, I sat with this person in step 3. They've got that same story. You need to be talking to them so that they can start their journey to health more efficiently, effectively, and that God can use people to reach people, not predominantly staff to reach people. And in that way, I mean, it's impossible to see what God could do through this plan. It changes so many things for us. It gets me emotional because I've been around this table for a very long time, feeling like I'm just banging my head against the wall. And all of us as staff have had this experience. Why aren't we getting the results that we wish we were getting? Not because we want to be famous or write books or have a church of 3,000 people, but because we see there are more hurting people then the people who are paid to work here can actually effectively disciple. How do we help people help people? I think this is the answer for that.
Well said.
It's what I do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And let's quit it then.